Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast, and thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk with Dr. Mary and talk to her about her passions and how she got into this, and about her dissertation, and just about her passions with brain and behavior. So, hello, Mary. Want to say
Oh,
hi to everybody out there?
yeah. Hey, everybody. Excited to have you back and excited to get going on this podcast and talk about my nerdy stuff that I love and how I help people and connect with Jen. A lot of times, when Jen and I hang out, we're doing fun stuff and not really nerdy stuff. And so it'll be fun to get to connect with
But our
Jen about
nerdy
it.
stuff always comes out because then we start
It always
joking about
does.
like that stuff, and nobody else gets what we're joking about.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah. We are total nerds at heart. So,
I own that. I love it.
yep, me too.
Yeah. So tell me about your dissertation.
Okay.
So I forgot the name of it. I'll let you announce it
Yeah,
and talk about it and how you chose that and what was, what brought you to that point where you chose that topic.
right. So my dissertation, it's titled A Mismatch of Emotion States, a Mechanism for Applied Memory Reconsolidation. To non-nerds, it really what memory reconsolidation is how an original consolidated network, which is a learning experience that we have, is called consolidated memory. When we store it in our brain, our experiences cause our brain to create neural networks. So we have consolidated networks, but when we change those original networks, then they become reconsolidated, and that really means it's a rewiring of those networks to different areas in the brain. So a mismatch of emotion states, remember the title is A Mismatch of Emotion States, a mechanism for applied memory reconsolidation. Um, a mismatch, in order to have memory reconsolidation occur, you have to have a mismatch between what the brain expects to happen and what actually occurs. So using emotion states, and I can describe emotion states, uh, very simplified, are if you think of emotion in society, we kind of talk about emotion like it's happy, sad, angry, glad. But those are all actually descriptors that we use to
Mhm.
describe our emotion states. So think of emotion this way. Emotion, electrochemical signals that tell your body to take an action, emotion. So, for instance, if you run across a tiger, your body automatically creates an emotion state. It's very simplified in terms of an avoid state if it's something you don't like or that is threatening, or an approach state, something you do like. And the difference between the two are really the chemicals that our brain produces, our body produces. So you go outside and you see a tiger, your body goes into an avoid state and your body automatically responds to that actual threat. But because human beings also have this highly developed cortex, uh, we also respond to perceived threats. If you've ever been cheated on and your partner would put their phone upside down, sometimes just them putting their phone upside down will trigger this fight, flight, freeze response, this avoid state, and your body starts to respond to a perceived threat. But that perceived threat is based on prior experience, not necessarily a current experience. So, but it's reflexive. It's just like a reflex. People don't cause that to happen. So, um, creating a mismatch in my dissertation, uh, really the dissertation, which is an assessment of 20, what was it, 21, 22 rapid resolution therapy transcripts. It's a form of rapid trauma treatment, anxiety treatment, things like that. Um, And, I was looking for any transcripts, but I just didn't come across any other transcripts other than the RRT transcripts, which were published in John Connolly's book. Um, what was it called? Let's see. John Connolly's book is called Life-Changing Conversations with Rapid Resolution Therapy. A single conversation can be a life-changing event. So that was the book where the transcripts are published. And as a trained rapid resolution therapist, I know that it works. So um, I loved being able to evaluate those and apply them to the research, the neuroscience research about how memory reconsolidation happens at the neural level. Um, and really, the way that research was done, the way that they discovered this happens was by researching sea slugs, because sea slugs have the largest neurons and these neurons can be observed empirically in microscopically. So they could see how they could train a slug and then retrain that slug and reconsolidate its memories and see how the networks change. So when you apply that understanding to other animals, and there's quite a few different animals that they've studied and could see how memory reconsolidation actually changes those reflexive responses when that mismatch occurs, that a mismatch between what's expected and what occurs.
Do you know how they took the research from sea slugs and other animals to humans?
Well, that's why the study is called applied memory research, memory reconsolidation, because you can't if you can't visually see those networks change in human beings, but you can see the result of using similar interactions with humans to cause a memory reconsolidation um, um, to be assumed. So it's called apply because you're applying what they know in neuroscience to humans, but it's actually inferred. That means you just have to assume, because you can't see it, that human brains change the same way as those animal
Hmm,
networks.
okay,
Yeah.
fascinating. It's amazing
Yeah.
that you can take information from sea slugs and transfer it over to humans.
Yeah. Yeah. They've studied fish and crabs and sea slugs and different research applying that to human beings as well.
Yeah. Well,
So
and it makes you wonder, this is for a different conversation, but like all those neurons in the slugs, from an evolutionary purpose, what was it for?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So and the interesting thing, as far as we know, animals don't have that highly developed cortex that attaches meaning and reason and belief to their experiences. I use the example, if a rat, if there's a mouse in the forest and it sees a snake under a rock, it will avoid that rock, but it doesn't avoid all rocks. It doesn't generalize its trauma. Human beings, you have one boyfriend that cheats on you, and pretty soon you're avoiding all relationships because your human brains that attach all this meaning and reason and belief, we do generalize our traumatic experiences a lot of times, and
We
rather than
overcomplicate things.
absolutely.
Yes.
So, finding ways to really bring ourselves back to using our animal brains actually helps, from my experience, helps people change their brains more effectively so that those networks don't keep getting triggered by experiences, post-traumatic stress, trauma, anxiety. It doesn't matter what you call it, it's all basically the same in the brain. So it's about learning how to work with your brain, not against it.
Well, when we're in grad school and we're, about to graduate, we have to pick our our dissertation. You know, did you have this as your idea of what you wanted to do, or were there people helping you, pushing you towards that? Was this always your passion?
Yeah, from the very beginning, because I've been in practice as a marriage and family therapist for 13 years. And so being trained in neuropsychotherapy and rapid resolution therapy, I really kind of combined both of those models. Um, and um, by by doing that, I could just, I could see in my clients what actually caused change. And so when I decided to do my doctorate, I definitely had an interest in furthering that knowledge for myself and for others. And so the program that I did, um, I really wanted to conduct research on humans, but the IRB, the review board for
Mhm.
the school wouldn't allow me to do that. So I ended up having to just review those transcripts instead. But it doesn't matter because I've done the work with my clients and I know what works and how this works and how it's applied. And so, yeah, I do still want to further that research and, hopefully have others further that research as well so that emotion pairing is what I call it, which really uses um, um, that emotion, that fight, flight, freeze response, and how we feel it in our body as the measure for whether it's changed or not. But you do that by creating another feeling state. If you have an avoid state, you create an approach state and imagine that being the response instead. And your body goes, oh, that feels better than this one. And because there's that prediction error, that mismatch between what's expected and what occurs, the brain goes, oh, okay, that feels better. And rewiring happens, and people stop experiencing fight, flight, freeze responses to, their distressing events or
Yeah.
distressing memories.
It's, so easy to condition ourselves into something, to think of, or feel a certain way, but we always forget that there's the unconditioning that comes with it. It's
Yeah,
just, looking at habits, looking at the things that we've done that strengthen that fight, flight, or freeze, and learning
yeah,
how to break that and, go towards the approach versus the avoid.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate and fortunate for some. The gold standard treatment for trauma for veterans, and by the American Psychological Association, is prolonged exposure therapy. And in my dissertation, I created a comparison between what's required with prolonged exposure therapy and what's required for memory reconsolidation, and they don't match. And um, basically, the understanding is that with prolonged exposure therapy, you're actually creating another network that can be used, but the original network still exists. Where with memory reconsolidation, you're actually changing the original network so that avoidant response can't exist anymore.
Well, it's almost like
So,
you're removing that whole portion of it. With
yes,
prolonged exposure, you're keeping somebody in a fight, flight, or freeze, state of mind, right? Whereas you are changing all of that to be
yes,
able to, remove any fear, remove all the things to be able to do things differently.
yeah.
We're
And
changing your body and your brain.
yeah, the disadvantage also of that, one of the problems with that is that research, to get empirical research in psychology, it can take 40, 50, 60 years sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
that did become the gold standard. But that research, there's lots of research that says that those studies didn't account for the dropout rate, which was 36%.
Damn.
and in multiple studies. And but that was all that was available at the time. And now we have so much new knowledge about how the brain works and how the chemistry in our brain affects our bodies and our guts and everything. And it's so important to understand that and start applying that so that we can, you know, get rid of treatments that aren't effective and have more effective treatments so that we can get rid of the stigma in mental health and
Yes.
the ideas that people have that it doesn't work, because sometimes it doesn't work. And there's plenty new options out there. And I think the disadvantage with calling it the gold standard treatment is people will say, this is the best. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to stop, because it's not
Yeah.
the best. There's plenty of new research out there that helps a lot
Yeah.
of people. So don't just go with evidence-based treatments, because evidence-based treatments can take years and years to exist in psychology.
Right. And you think about too, the new treatments, people like, look at that sometimes and they're like, they downgraded, did they dismiss it? And then we
Yeah,
find out years later that it actually works,
yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
But you're right, that 40 to 50-year lag, right? It's like it takes a while to do like longitudinal studies or even other studies,
Yeah.
so the information we're getting, is not keeping up with what, like the evolution of technology, the evolution of people in itself, and everything that we're being exposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. And the the thing I love about these forms of treatment that I research that are considered rapid, you know, they are within 2 hours, you can change a person's brain. And they never, yeah, maybe I talked earlier about my husband's issue with the sandals. Did we talk about that on our podcast? I can't
No,
remember.
we didn't.
I've done
No.
quite a few podcasts about it, but really I call it my fastest treatment ever. And it probably took 10-15 minutes to treat his trauma that, we he'd had from the time he was 4 or 5 years old. And, the cool thing about being able to see, to understand memory reconsolidation is you can't change a network if you don't use it. So you have to have some level of reactivation of the network, and then you cause the mismatch. So there's a disagreement between what's expected and what occurs. But that window, once that network is unlocked, it's unlocked for about 5 hours before it locks again, um, to go back to the same network. Or when you create a new network, you have that reconsolidation window. So you can do a lot of work on somebody's trauma within 5 hours before that network tries to reconnect itself and lock up to
So what's
maintain a
the sandal
consolidated network.
story? Like what happened with the sandals?
Yeah. So when I met my husband, it's so funny. I guess there's quite a few stories that come to mind, but this is the one that I end up telling all the time, at trainings and other podcasts. But when I met him, he had this thing about shoes. He didn't want to hire people based on the shoes they wore. He didn't want to be friends with people that wore certain shoes. And we always kind of razzed him like it was a superficial or superstitious thing. It's funny because as I'm saying it, it's almost like a script in my mind, because I told the story so often explaining my research. But um I always razzed him about it. One day we're sitting in a parking lot, and it's in Grand Junction, Colorado. It was warm, and he sees a lady walking across the parking lot, and he says, "You see that lady over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I fucking hate her." I'm like, "Why?" He said, "Well, look at her shoes. She was wearing a pair of sandals." I kind of roll my eyes. And he says, "I really need to get rid of this because it really does affect my life." And that was the first time I realized, oh shit, this is trauma. I've been razzing him about it forever. And I said, okay, if you want to get rid of it, when you see those shoes, where do you feel that in your body? And he points at his gut and he says, it's right there. It's a burning in my gut. I fucking hate her. And I said, okay. I said, and the interesting thing about that, why that feeling is important is because that's when you know there's an emotion, an electrochemical signal that's telling his body to avoid, right?
Yes.
And that electrochemical signal is really driven from adrenaline and cortisol. It's his body going into a fight, flight, freeze response. But usually what people do is they feel that feeling and they just avoid, stay away from the shoes. That memory is activated, but then it locks back up. It's never changed. But because he used the network, it's actually strengthened over time. He fired it, gets a little more myelin built around it, and it gets stronger over time. So I said, okay, close your eyes for a minute, cause that feeling to happen on purpose, and scan back through your life to the very first time you remember feeling that feeling. And really, that's a component of rapid resolution therapy is, and John Connolly, who developed that, was not, I don't believe, aware of memory reconsolidation from a neuroscience standpoint, but that was one of the components of rapid resolution therapy. So I think he calls it ghost busting is what he calls it. But so he closed his eyes and it was probably 3 to 5 seconds. And he said, oh my God, I remember what it was. He said, I was about 4 or 5. And I think the cool thing about this is really what I asked him to do is approach that network instead of avoid that network.
Yeah.
And cognition does start to come up for people. And sometimes you can get a story out of a feeling that you didn't even have awareness. And he didn't have an awareness, but he said, I remember what it was. He said, I was about 4 or 5 years old and I loved wearing my cowboy boots. And I was going to a petting zoo one day and my mom wouldn't let me wear my cowboy boots. She made me wear a pair of sandals. And he hated the sandals. So he had that hate feeling. Well, then he got to the petting zoo and got too close to the lady milking the cow, and the cow stepped on his foot. So in his mind, he's got that hate feeling, but then he also is like, that's so stupid. So he would see people, see people in shoes and think they're stupid and hate them because those emotions were already active in his brain. And then he got his foot stepped on, which shot that adrenaline and cortisol up in his body, but he hated the shoes. So he blamed the shoes. His brain made a rule about shoes instead of a rule about cows. So here he was, 40 some years old at the time, being emotionally triggered at the level of a 4 or 5-year-old because that's how that network was encoded in his brain. So he said the first thing he does is say, oh my gosh, that's so stupid. I can't believe I do that, right? He immediately starts shaming himself, which is going to produce a little more adrenaline and cortisol, right? It's something you're supposed to avoid. I said, no, let's keep it in context. That was a really important rule for your brain to make based on how you understood the world at the time. And he's like, okay. I said, now let's change it. So this is specific emotion pairing. So I said, now let's set that aside. We've activated the network already. You can't change a network if you don't use it. So you have to have a little bit of discomfort. But the research shows if you have too much discomfort, it will lock down your brain's ability to change that network. So, going into fight, flight, freeze around a previous event does not make it better for changing the network. Prolonged exposure therapy says you need to experience that 90-minute sessions often. And that can shut down the network. Yes, it absolutely does, which is why the dropout rate is 36%.
Yeah.
So I said, let's set that aside. Now let's think of something that makes you laugh. And the first thing he came up with was he acted like a dork one year at Thanksgiving. And I was going, I am a yam. I am a yam. And I don't know why he thinks it's so funny, but he does. And I said, when you think of that memory, where do you feel that in your body? And he said, it's in my shoulders and my head. It's a lighter feeling. I said, okay, let's go back to that memory. Put your foot back under the cow on purpose for a minute, but this time do it with that light feeling in your head and your shoulders where you know, my foot doesn't hurt. Sandals are not a threat. I'm okay. Mom's not making me wear sandals. And just stay there with that light feeling in your head and your shoulders. And really what we're doing is we're creating dopamine because this is an approach state, right? So we're taking an approach state and we're applying that feeling to the avoid state. And we did that for maybe 30 seconds, a minute. And I said, you can imagine that however you want. Maybe imagine me standing there next to the cow acting like a yam and keep that light feeling. I said, after about 30 seconds or a minute or so, I said, now open your eyes and look for another pair of sandals in the parking lot and try to make that burning happen in your gut again. And it was easy to do. It was summer. So found a pair of sandals, no more burning. I said, find another pair, try to make that burning feeling happen. And he couldn't. And, I always joke because before then, this man would wear his socks and shoes to the beach, right? He would wear his boots
I'm
everywhere.
never wearing a sandal again.
Oh, yeah. And after this, he wears flip-flops. You've seen him. He wears flip-flops and slides all the time. He hardly ever wears his boots when we're just hanging out. He only uses his boots to work and, his socks and shoes. But he bought a pair of like strappy, like Tevas. And I was like, if you wear socks with those shoes, I'm going to need a therapist. Like, do not wear socks with them.
I'm going to get that feeling in my stomach.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to get that burning in my gut and I'm going to hate you.
I might see you, I'll be like, eh.
Yeah. So, and I think that's probably been, maybe 8 or 10 years ago and never had an issue with it again. And
But you think about that conditioning that happening, right? Like he was 4 years old, and our brain isn't fully developed, right? But
yeah,
instead of being pissed at the cow and learning you don't wear sandals around cows, he learned that sandals suck.
Yeah. Yeah. It was automatic because he already hated the sandals.
Yeah.
And those emotions that are present when we have experiences, those emotions, electrochemicals get encoded in that network so that when we're triggered by it later, it's a reflexive response that reactivates the same chemicals and, same electrochemical responses. So the response is very similar to what it was when those encoded networks happen.
Right.
Or when they're encoded into our brains, but they can be changed. He can't even make himself uncomfortable about it anymore.
Right. Well, you think about all the shit that we experience all through childhood without a fully developed brain and how many mismatched things that we put together, and it simply could have been his mom's like, remember, you're not wearing boots, stay away from the cow, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but as a kid, if you're always wearing boots and you put sandals on, you don't realize, oh, I guess the cow stepping on my foot's going to be very different in cowboy boots versus sandals.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't understand that, their trauma is automatic. The ways that they respond are because there's 3-year-olds have more neurons in their brain to connect with other neurons in their brain than they'll ever have at any point in their lives. And so you think, 4 or 5-year-olds learn to tie their shoes and it encodes a network, and they're using the same network today as 50-year-old adults tying their shoes. But we don't always have a conscious recollection of where we learn to have those responses. So,
well, the importance of the prefrontal cortex too, right? Which isn't fully developed till at least 25, right? So we have all these neurons as kids, but the absence of that prefrontal cortex development, there's a huge disconnect between, 3 and 25.
The majority of our dopamine circuits run in our prefrontal cortex. So we have less of that ability to regulate our emotions using dopamine when we're younger. And then if we have family members that have their own trauma that keeps them in fight, flight, freeze, so they're not emotionally available to help be the dopamine supporters for us, to teach us
Right.
how to build more of those dopamine circuits to downregulate our bodies. That's where you get intergenerational trauma. Your parents who have trauma can't help you learn things that they don't know.
Yeah.
So, the more we understand about how those neural networks exist, even without cognition, and how they drive our interactions in the world, the more we can stop pathologizing people as if you're causing this problem. I hate the term you're self-sabotaging. No, that's
No,
not
you're
what it is.
surviving.
Yeah, you've
Yeah.
learned a lot of things that you didn't even know you learned, and your body may be protecting you from something you don't even have a conscious recollection of. But
Yeah.
let's help teach your body how to be present in this moment and encode networks that are down-regulated approach states when there's no actual threat. Fight, flight,
Right.
freeze is only useful when there's an actual threat.
Yeah. But that state that we're in made sense at some time in our childhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and all that
Absolutely.
stuff, often comes from other people's voices, other people's actions, other people's
Yes.
their own trauma.
We
So here we
have
are now.
Yes, we have to
Yeah,
normalize before we pathologize, which is why I love marriage and family therapy, because it stops being focused on, you know, a mental health diagnosis and, using pathologized terms like gaslighting, or, just the term selfish, the way society talks about it, as if one person could be selfish instead of self-preserving, right?
yeah,
If I say to you, you're selfish, the purpose of me saying that is so that you'll do something that has value for me. It doesn't mean it's the most valuable thing for you.
right.
So,
Everything makes sense in our family of origin, but
yeah,
it's like, what do? We get married and we forget to talk about what did you come from? What did I come from? How are we going to get rid of that and come and build our own
yes.
family with our own meaning to it?
Yeah, we're all
Yeah.
normal within the context of our own lives. I like, it's kind of an offshoot of John Connolly's, um, yeah, way that he describes people as houses. I like to think of, kids as these little houses, and all the adults in their life are throwing plants in their house, and these plants are, this is the information that's important. Make sure you do this, and don't forget to do that, and this makes you a bad person. And so this your little house as a kid gets full of these plants, and you hit about 18, or the smart kids that end up getting in a lot of trouble find out sooner than 18. I'm tired of being told what to do, and they throw the screens up. And then adults talk about them like they think they know everything. Well, they do. Imagine all the adults throwing stuff at you
They
and
know
just
exactly what you
filling.
told them.
Yep, exactly. And they've been told by everybody. So they have this little house full of plants, but they try to, work through that jungle of information and apply all the information so that they're good boys and girls. But really what works best is, you know, throw the screens off and start getting rid of those plants that are filling up your house that don't fit in your house.
Yeah.
Because
Well, those
otherwise,
plants grow, right? Like uncontrollably, right? And before you
yes,
know it, everything's mixed together. So it's like
yep,
go through and let's weed the plants. What doesn't work, what
yes.
does work, what aligns with your values.
Yeah, but a lot of
Yeah.
times people don't do that because grandma gave me this plant. And if I throw this
Yes.
out, it means I don't love her. No, it does. You can love her and still get rid of a message that she
Yeah.
gave you.
You
It
can
doesn't
think differently.
mean,
You can feel differently. You
yeah,
can do anything that you want to be your own person.
absolutely. And then it's
Yeah.
complicated when, you meet a partner and those houses come together, and your plant's getting in my plant and your house is taking over my house, and there's this,
Hey, what's the automatic assumption? You're wrong. I'm right.
yes, yep,
Yeah.
this is the right information here.
Yeah.
Instead
You're doing
of,
it wrong.
yep,
Yep.
instead of understanding this was normal. within the context of your life growing up, but it's not effective here. So two people have to come together and create an integrated reality, integrated so that both people have influence. They have equal value in the relationship, but they have to accept influence from one another, not just have things their own way. They can't always be right. There are other ways to do things.
Yes. Yep.
So, and
Yeah.
sometimes you have to help unpack that baggage. I always say nobody gets out of childhood without baggage. It's still your job to unpack it. So,
Right.
as partners, understanding those traumatic responses or experiences can help each of them start to unpack their baggage, get rid of those plants, and know that it doesn't mean I don't care. It means I have to care about me. I have to design my
Right.
life around what works for me and my partner and create this new integrated reality.
I always go back to the quote from Hope Floats, like adulthood is the time we spent trying to get over our childhood.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I like the idea of the houses, because when you talk to people and help them take those screens off and start getting rid of information that isn't helpful for them, they do start to design their life and at a younger age and not have to wait until all of their adulthood is gone to feel some level of satisfaction and
Right.
peacefulness in their life.
Yeah. But you find these people who are like, they get a cancer diagnosis that's, terminal, or they're like getting close to the end of life and there's so many regrets. And they're like, I
Yeah,
wish I would have done things differently. Don't wait until you're at that point.
yeah,
Start earlier and know that, it's okay to be flexible. It's okay to
yeah,
like let go of control. We're
yeah,
all going to be okay.
yeah. And even the word regret, I always ask my clients to get rid of that term rather than look at what do you appreciate about it? What did you learn from it? Because then it has
Yeah.
value, right? It
Right.
doesn't mean you're glad that it happened. It means you learned from it and you applied that moving forward and it made you a better person.
And you're
You don't
changing
have
your
to
future
regret
and
it.
your trajectory.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yep.
Designing your life, not trying to find yourself, but design yourself.
Yes, yes. And we
Yeah.
forget we can do that. Sometimes we just feel like we're so like, this is just our lot in life. And, we have so many options. I think of the movie Groundhog Day, right? When he like
Yeah.
every day is a new day for him and he's like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go do this. I'm gonna drop the toaster in the thing. But it's
Right.
like, when you start to realize sometimes when there is monotony, we have the power to change it.
Yeah.
And as you're going through your research, how did it, impact your own life? What did you start
Oh, yeah.
noticing about what you were doing and how you were like, and not just personally, but professionally?
It's interesting because one of the things I've kind of prided myself on is feeling like I was in a good place before I went to school. I didn't go to school to treat myself. And so um I definitely before I started doing my dissertation, I definitely had applied these things to myself. For instance, um I used to uh, one day I was making grilled cheese sandwiches for me and Lonnie, and he walked out the door, and I shoved a bunch of cheese in my mouth, and I'm like, why did I just sneak that cheese? I'm like, I could eat a block of cheese in front of him. He doesn't care. He loves me. And I realized that it was one of the automatic things that I did as a kid because I had an abusive grandmother. And if there was something I wanted, I had to sneak it.
Oh,
And it was in that moment that I realized, and I did the same thing where you feel that in your body. And I could feel it in my gut, and I remembered immediately why I snuck food. And so the way that I treated that, because I knew cognitively I didn't need to sneak any cheese. And that cheese is going to my ass. I'm not getting back at grandma from the cheese. Grandma's dead, right?
right.
And so, have you seen the movie Bad Moms?
Yes.
And there's this segment on there where one of the moms is on this giant trike and rides it down the back patio and eats it at the end, and she stands up and is like, ah. That part of the show just made me belly laugh every time. And it's like, a 2 or 3 second part of the movie. But that belly laugh, I actually found the segment on YouTube, and I would watch the segment and check that the happy feeling from it, and then apply it over the same feeling I had when I was sneaking food as a kid. And I did that 3 or 4 times, and I no longer had that feeling or that concern about having had to sneak food. It was really teaching my body how to respond differently. So I use it all the time. If I have any discomfort that I don't want to have, it's my God, the level of anxiety I used to have in my life growing up was insane. And I just don't have that mindless anxiety anymore,
Oh, how
because that,
freeing.
yeah, it just conditioned that out of me. I used to hate the sound of styrofoam,
Oh
and
God, yeah.
it rubbing together, like it would give me chills. And I use that same segment in Bad Moms to um I had my daughter rub her finger on the styrofoam, and then I watched the segment, rub her finger. We did that 3 times, and then when I could no longer get those chills, then I rubbed my finger on it, watched the segment. And this is a 30-second process, maybe a minute to do this. And I don't get chills. I'm not bothered by the sound of styrofoam anymore. And I know where it was conditioned into me. I remember I was taking something out of the freezer to put in a styrofoam cooler, and my fingernail grazed across the top of the ice on the
Ooh,
freezer. And it made that association between the styrofoam and the cold feeling, but just that emotion pairing got rid of it. So I don't have that. So
wow.
even a physical response like that, you can condition to change in your body, but you have to fire the network. If I just avoided it, you can't change it. But it
That
doesn't
is
have
so
to be,
healing.
yeah, it doesn't have to be 12 sessions over the same issue trying to address it. It's really about teaching your body how to respond differently, because it's automatic, it's reflexive.
Right. It's so funny because I have this big fear of public speaking. And it stems from the fact that when I was little, I was in the Christmas play and I was the Easter bunny and I speak really fast. And everybody made fun of me afterwards. And I just learned just to like say what I had to say and just shut up because I was always like so aware of my fast
Hmm.
speaking. And one day I was going in, I was at some hospital giving, I had to go in and do a presentation. And right before that, I was sitting, I think I was in pediatrics, and there was a girl watching the Muppet Show. And I'm sitting there, the Swedish Chef comes on, right? And I'm sitting here watching it with her. And the Muppet Show always makes me laugh. It's so stupid.
Yeah.
But I'm sitting here laughing with this feel good thing. And then I remember going in to give my presentation to all these doctors. And I'm like, all I could think was the Swedish Chef and then the phenomena from
Yes.
my, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So now when I like go and like have to give like presentations, the Swedish Chef pops up.
That's awesome. I think maybe we had kind of touched on the subject before. I used to have the same thing of fear of public speaking. And like before I had to public speak, even presenting something, 5 minutes, it didn't matter. I would be in the bathroom for hours with an upset
Yes,
stomach, diarrhea.
yes,
And then, I'd get up to present, my hands would be shaking, my face would be red.
yes.
And then 5 minutes in, nothing. Everything's fine. Just finish, no problem. And it was interesting because when I was first learning um, rapid resolution therapy, I'd actually learned it from one the the therapist that I did my practicum with. Um, he had learned it, and he's like, "Will you be my guinea pig?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Um, so we ended up talking about that and what it went back to, when I asked Lonnie to scan back and he remembered having his foot stepped on by a cow. I had no recollection that really that fear of public speaking was caused from an experience I had as a kid where my older sister got a bra and I wanted one too. She was 2 years older than me. So, normal jealousy for a younger sister. And one of my friends gave me one and I had it hidden in my pocket. And my grandma found out. And remember, I said that she was an abusive grandma. Well, she found out that I had it. And her and my mom's sister, who was also abusive, um, they basically just ganged up on me and questioned me for about, in my mind as a kid, it felt like
Over
4
a
hours
bra?
over
You
a
think of all
bra.
the non-consequential things in life over
Yes.
a bra.
Yeah,
What a way
because
to
I
create a
was,
lot of shame.
yeah, absolutely, because I was sneaking it. And, but you see what the alternative was, being honest. I grew up in an environment where you couldn't be honest. If I wanted the cookie, I wasn't getting the cookie. You're going to have to sneak the cookie. You want the bra, you
Right.
don't get the bra. You're going to have to sneak the bra. So I was a sneaky kid, but that's important to understand in relationships that it's not just in isolation. Kids that
Yeah.
lie often have adults in their life that can't handle the truth.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
anyways, in my mind, my brain says, it was like 4 hours just being interrogated and shamed in front of other people. And, my little sister, my older sister, my cousin, they're all around, and I'm just being shamed for hours. Well, that resulted in me, being really uncomfortable when I have all those eyes on me. But I was his guinea pig for rapid resolution therapy. And, we just imagined that experience going away in different ways, like, putting a chapter in a balloon and letting it float up. And, it's really teaching your body how to let those things go. And so
Yes.
after that, um, I didn't have as much anxiety, but then I learned this other trick that I added to it where, and this also came from rapid resolution therapy, where, I would think, how would I like to respond? And so the way I'd like to respond when I'm presenting is um, create calm, confident, intelligent, flexible, and playful.
Mm.
Um, but our brain doesn't actually multitask. We can move rapidly between things, but if I'm focused on being confident, I'm not focused on being calm. And if I'm focused on being calm, I'm not focused on being playful. So what I did is I took all five of those and combined them. And one of the things that represents all of those in my mind is a dolphin. And so
Mm.
after that, when I would present, I would just become a dolphin. And then that's all I had to focus on. And it was always about being a dolphin, not checking to see if I was a dolphin,
Yeah.
right? Because when we're checking ourselves, that's when we're like, ah,
The
we're
pressure,
not.
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
It creates
after
fight, flight,
that,
or freeze because it's no longer
yeah,
are we in the present.
yeah. So
Yeah.
after that, I stopped having that anxiety, and if I ever felt any, I would just be a dolphin. I would think of a dolphin, and the cool thing is, I got my
That's
dolphin
awesome.
tattoo. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my
Well,
spirit animal.
with confidence too, like I just had a conversation with a client about confidence. She's like, well, with confidence, don't I have to believe in it? I'm like, no, no, no. 90% of it is like pretending.
Yeah,
And being confident is also having the bravery is not even a word, being brave enough and courageous
yeah,
enough to be able to say, hey, I'm confused. I interpreted it this way. This is what I'm feeling. Is this correct? So confidence isn't just a feeling, it's action too, to be
yeah,
able to check yourself, to be able to have that, be brave, courageous, to sit there and do all the things to go and make sure that what you're perceiving and what you're feeling, do they match?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
it's also, you know, interacting with it when your brain is in a downregulated state, because a lot of times we get into that situation and try to get out, but in that moment when our body is like, we're in a fight, flight, freeze response. Our prefrontal cortex is shut down and we don't create, our brain doesn't learn basket weaving when we're running from a bear.
Exactly.
It just reacts to what's wired into it beforehand. So this is the value of having a therapist that you could talk to help you design how you'd like to respond. And it doesn't have to be this ongoing relationship forever and ever. It could just be, go in. Hey, I'm struggling with this issue. Can we work on this? Okay, we're done. See you next year, whatever. And because it's really about teaching your body how to feel confident. If somebody doesn't feel confident in this environment, when I'm working with a client, I may say, when is the time that you did feel confident? And where did you feel that in your body? What did that feel like? And
Yes.
let's take that feeling and apply it here and just imagine it being the same way. Just imagining it actually creates neural change in your brain.
Right.
But kids are taught not to imagine, focus, get your head back in the game instead of, yes, we absolutely need downtime without information going in and information going out so that we're starting to make those connections with what's already in there.
Yeah. Well, you think with the US education system, we got rid of creativity and like usually PE, right? And recess.
Yeah.
It's all like the logic, sit there and don't move your body. And we become these little robots that have no idea what we're feeling, where we're feeling it, or why. Now all of a sudden we're shut down all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
so much about what we're conditioned with in our society is ignore your discomfort and do what makes me comfortable
Exactly.
instead of, yeah, giving everybody some time to manage their discomfort. So it's not everybody else's job to manage it for you,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we think
That's
about
relationship.
kids, right, on the spectrum, right? And the spectrum now includes ADHD, right? It's all underneath the
Mm-hmm.
same umbrella. And we think about that's a sign of giftedness, right? They think
Yes.
differently, they see the world differently, but they don't fit into our typical, education system, and too much movement irritates teachers when they're trying to like teach, right?
Yes.
So what do we teach kids? Just shut down completely. If you
Yeah.
can't move to calm, you're either understimulated or overstimulated. And if you can't regulate your system by moving, what do we teach kids?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I love that I'm seeing more and more the depathologizing of children's discomfort and the
Yes.
awareness that, how you behave as a parent does have an impact on how your child behaves and
Yes.
how your children behave have an impact on how you behave, that there's that relationship where we impact one another and we stop looking at individuals in isolation of the world and say you're the common denominator in in all of your problems, instead of, no, sometimes we gravitate towards the same kind of people and have the same problems because
Yeah.
our brain likes predictability, and even chaos
Yes.
is predictable.
Yes. But you notice that a lot of times there's unpredictability. There's always predictability in the unpredictability.
Yep.
Or in the predictability. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's predictability in the unpredictability.
Yep.
Yeah. And we forget that
Exactly.
as humans, that even though somebody or something may be unpredictable, we can look at it and find themes, we can find patterns, we can
Yeah.
do things, but we're
Yep.
so wired for survival,
Yep.
that we just
And
go,
yeah, and people on the spectrum like me with ADHD and definitely on the autism spectrum, however that is merged, my brain picked up on patterns really easily. And
yes.
being able to pick up on those patterns easily as a kid, sometimes that got me in trouble because it found me a loophole to get where I
Yep.
wanted to go. And it got me away from the people that were, trying to shut down all my loopholes.
Right.
So just
Yeah.
it's
Well, and what do you learn? You learn to stop talking to the adults around you. You stop
yeah,
communicating. You stop feeling. You kind of just, uh, you know, just go out and you do the world yourself. And
Yeah.
we need people with prefrontal cortex development to help guide us.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
definitely didn't have a lot of that in my life growing up.
Right. Well,
But I
even the ones
think
that you did have were probably very emotionally stunted with their own prefrontal
absolutely.
cortex development.
Yep, their own intergenerational trauma for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I that's why I love marriage and family therapy too, because it looks at families as a whole system. I don't look at, my parents or my grandparents like they intended to fuck me up. I look at them and understand they had their own trauma and couldn't have done anything different because their experiences wired them the way they are. They only knew what they knew when they knew it. And so I don't sit in hate for those people or sit in just uh you know they're to blame for all of my issues. Like I
Yeah.
said, nobody gets out of childhood without baggage. It's still my job to unpack it.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yes. Yes. It's
and
all of our
nobody,
jobs to unpack your shit.
yep.
Yeah. It's
I'm
not fair to
sure
blame everyone and everything for problems. You have to look, sometimes you have to look at the common denominator and be like, what
yeah.
is the common problem here?
Yeah. And what was the
Yeah.
culture back then? When I was a kid, it was, really kids were to be seen and not heard. And,
Yeah.
without a doubt, I was treated that way as a kid. But that was also how society viewed how to parent. Dr. Spock was like, send them to their room. They can be there forever by themselves, whatever it was. I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, the whole
But
spanking thing too, just spank the
yeah,
crap out of them, beat them. Yeah. Because,
yep,
aggression
absolutely.
always, helps with
Yeah.
parenting.
Oh, yeah. Put them in a Shark Tank and see if they can do math.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Let's scream at them,
absolutely.
yell at them, and then throw them in the shark tank, see what happens.
Yeah. Well, that's the Shark Tank, right?
Yeah.
Screaming and
Yeah.
yelling at a kid, don't throw the ball in the house. They learn to avoid you. They don't learn to understand why not to throw the ball in the house, right?
Yeah.
You create an avoid state. Nobody learns in an avoid state. They react in an avoid state. So you
I have a
have to
friend.
create an approach state for learning to occur.
Yeah, I have a friend that calls it the traffic cop parent. Like, you teach your kids to only follow the rules when you're using aggression when you're there, right? Like a traffic
Yes.
cop, right? So you
Yep.
see the cop, you slow down, right? But
Yep.
what happens after you pass the cop? You speed back up. So when you're using aggression, when you're using a lot of shame, what happens is we just teach kids to avoid us, not to stop what they're
Yep.
doing.
And
Yeah.
as soon as they get out from under that umbrella of shame and verbal, emotional abuse, whatever it is, physical abuse, they're just going to avoid you because you've been associated with that.
Right.
And they don't want to be around it. And it's automatic. It's not even cognitive. It's a feeling that says, stay away from that. That's dangerous.
Yeah. That person is dangerous. Run, run.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a
Yeah.
parent, doesn't matter how much you love them, they're not going to feel it.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
So,
So where do you plan on going from this point? Do you plan on doing more research? Do you plan on just keep practicing? Like, do you want to go teach? Like, what is your like long-term goals?
yeah. So right now we're in the process of uploading these podcasts. We're going to be on Spotify in
Woohoo.
a couple days. And so doing that and writing a book. I'm gonna write a book, try to get that out as soon as possible, and do some more presentations on memory reconsolidation, emotion pairing, and really try to further the awareness and the research on that. Doing
Good.
my own research on my own work isn't the most effective way of furthering that cause. So my goal is to try to get others to do that research. And research
Good.
isn't my favorite. I like to inform research or do literature reviews and learn because I'm a nerd. And but yeah, I definitely want to participate in furthering the research, but not sure how.
Good. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I think it's so needed. I think, like you said, it takes 40 to 50 years of, research, and anything that we can get in the meantime to show us that there is, you know, so many like developments in brain and behavior and feeling is super
Yeah.
important.
And there's
Yeah.
so much awesome research out there. That's so
Yeah.
much that, can be applied. It's just a matter of taking downtime to figure out how to creatively apply that to human research. If we're just learning all the time, right? Information going in or information going out, our default mode doesn't take the opportunity to connect all that information. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and
when
having
you
to go through reading all the research journals, all that stuff is like mind-numbingly boring.
yeah,
If you're out
yeah,
there, if you ever read like an academic journal, it like they don't like they're not speaking general like
yeah,
public speak, and it's sometimes you just have to slow your brain down and you have to like read it a million times to
yeah.
understand it. It's not fun.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and that's funny that you say that, because that's actually one of my other interests that I have is really pushing for changing, the way that we communicate in scientific terminology, medical terminology, whatever it is that makes it difficult for, the average layperson to understand it.
Yeah.
The way that you have to write a dissertation is
Right.
so
Well, it's geared towards
mind-numbingly
academia, right?
boring.
It's not geared
Yes.
towards the general public. So, I
Yes.
say if you want people to read it, talk to you like you're five, break it
Yes.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Einstein's quote, if you can't teach it to a sixth grader, you don't know it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. So changing that language, but that's why I also, try to really use a lot of metaphors to help people, or storylines to help people understand how things are applied. Because otherwise it's just mind-numbing information that can't be
Yeah.
used. It's just a waste of time
Yeah.
if
Well,
it
I
can't be
know
applied.
Brene Brown is very controversial in like our like field. Some people look at her and think, "Oh, she's not serious," but she is a researcher.
Mhm.
And I love that she's able to be charismatic enough and break it down to the general public, right? She breaks it down
Yeah.
into little anecdotes. She's funny about it. She can break it down to the simplest level. And I
Mhm.
think, that's needed a lot of times. But I feel like the people who are all like, she's not a researcher are the ones that like are so up here that can't relate to other people
Yeah.
because they're so about, oh well, it has to be written like this, it has to be like in
Yeah.
this format, and I think that just loses so many people. Right.
Yeah.
Gag me.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's just understanding people. There's 8 billion people on the planet, and everybody's brain has about 100 trillion synaptic connections where our memories and experiences are stored as electrochemical signals. You have 100 trillion, I have 100 trillion. There's 8 billion people on the planet. What's the mathematical likelihood that any two can be the same? It's
Right, and they're going to
zero.
interpret the same, right? Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
and so when you understand it's zero, you stop saying, I see it this way, so I'm right and you're wrong, instead of, hey, this is what works for me, what works for you. And you start to integrate realities again, just like we're talking about integrating realities in your little house as kids when you become an adult. It if we don't look at human beings that way, we just see ourselves according to what is wired into our brain, and
Yes.
how that wiring was created to keep us safe and comfortable, but keeps us in a box. And happiness and health and excitement is way outside that box. But
Right.
our body says, oh, you saw a snake under that rock, so you need to avoid all rocks. You're correct
Yes.
for the rest of your life. And that is not healthy. It doesn't help us grow and experience life the way we want to. Doesn't design
Right.
it.
Well, you think about The Croods, the movie The Croods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen it? Like
Yep.
that dad is so like set in his ways, right? And if his family wasn't pushing him, the family would have like, there would have been a
Yes.
demise of the family. And it wasn't for other people pushing him and telling him, no, it's safe, it's okay. We can go
Yes.
outside this cave, we can do those things, right? But from an
Absolutely.
evolutionary perspective, we wouldn't get to where we're at as a society if we, did not break those things of,
Yes.
oh, be afraid of a rock because all rocks have snakes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that goes back to the understanding about memory reconsolidation. When our brain creates a network, my husband's brain created a network that protected him from shoes. And, until dopamine was produced beyond that threshold of tolerance, his body stayed the same. His body was like, no, you have to avoid shoes. You can't be friends with that person. You can't hire that person. They're stupid. You hate them.
They're going to get
And
stepped on by a cow.
yes, and until he got interacted with the feeling state that was telling him to avoid, until he interacted with it in an approach state manner, he was just responding to what was conditioned into his body before any other experience. And it was automatic. He didn't even have a conscious recollection of that. And
Wow.
the majority of the wiring that we have is created in our brains before we know shit about how the world works. And we just have all the adults saying, hey, this is what I know about the world. Do it my way, do it my way, do it my way. And that's not the only way
Well,
to
and they want
interact
it
in the
done their
world.
way because they
So
want it
they're
easier for
comfortable.
themselves.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Not
Yes.
because they like it's the best way. It's just because it
Right.
reduces their discomfort.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a little bit of discomfort is on the avoid state spectrum, right?
Yes.
And is it deadly? No. The value of discomfort is when you overcome it, your body produces dopamine beyond that threshold of tolerance, and pretty soon that becomes something you love to do.
Right.
You can teach your body to love things that you
Yes.
hate if you have an interest in doing it and you recognize the safety in doing it. That most of
Right.
it is just a chemical change. Your animal
Yes.
brain is trying to protect you, but your human brain has some pretty cool ways of interacting with it differently.
Yes. Yes. Well, I love your passion. I love the way that you talk about these things, and I'm so excited about what you're going to do in the future for like this field. So I'm
Thank
super
you.
excited. Yeah. Thank
Awesome.
you for
Thank you.
sharing with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. If I were to sit here and talk by myself, I'd be like, "Dee."
I love the nerdiness comes out. We like find something we're passionate about. We're just like,
Yeah.
oh, I just can't wait to tell everyone about it, talk about it.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why I love talking to you about it because you have the same passion.
Yeah. And then look what happens. We go from one tangent to another because it's just so
Yep.
much we're excited
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Well, and being ADHD, our brains think like, big circle and it's all
We are not
connected.
linear.
No, no. So
Yes.
it's cool being able to see it in here, but getting it from here out here can be difficult for sure.
I love
So,
talking to other neurodivergent people because they're like, I know I'm all over. I'm like, no, I am following you.
yep.
I
Yeah.
am seeing it and I am getting it.
Oh yeah, my brain is just building these connections.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love it.
When I ask somebody questions about something, I'm like, how did you not ask more information about that thing that you just saw? Aren't you curious? They're like, no. And I'm like, but I am.
Right. Go back, ask that question for me.
Right. I'm
Yeah,
like, how do
that's
you not
awesome.
ask more information? Yeah.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
cool. So, we should be on Spotify within the week.
Cool.
And this is podcast 7. So everything should be live within the week. And
Awesome. My daughter was looking at my calendar and she saw Mary podcast and she's like, you have a podcast? I said, yeah. She's like, how many are out there? I'm like, I think we are on number 7. She's like, and you didn't tell me? And I'm like, she's like,
that's
I'm going to
funny.
look this up. And I'm like, you can't right now.
Yeah, well, it is on YouTube. It's live on YouTube.
Oh,
So
okay. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm
I'll
gonna
see if
I'm
she
gonna share
Googled it.
that. Yeah, I'm gonna share that in all of our social media this
Awesome.
week. Yeah.
Cool.
So I think one of the other things you and I'll talk about is getting our TikTok going and putting
Yes.
some segments on there, and
Yes.
you and I adding some stuff on there even
Cool.
independently.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to
All right.
stop the recording and I'll see you guys next time. Join in, share our podcast, subscribe, and we'll keep feeding you a bunch of nerdy shit.
Remember, go out there, be curious. You have the power to change yourself, and just changing ourselves changes our world around us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See you next
Go be
time.
great, guys.
Yeah.